This morning our subject will be the artisan in the temple. The artisan in the temple is always each individual. Each of us are consecrated to being workmen to build the temple of God. Somewhere along the line in the snarl of the human personality, we become involved in the concept of saying, someone else but not I. We do this through several methods. We eliminate ourselves from becoming artisans by saying we are not worthy of being artisans. We eliminate ourselves from becoming artisans by saying other people do not think we are worthy to be. Therefore, the first concept that is utterly important to us is the concept of recognizing not what man thinks, but what God thinks and what God has thought. The primal purpose of the Creator to make of man an artisan in the temple, then, is an activity of the wise master builders of the race, the ascended masters. Many times we are prone also to fail in the recognition of their role in our development. This is done through many methods. Again, I am not worthy, or someone does not think me worthy. And this is always based on past performance and the assessment of either the individual or the other person of our value in life. And our value in life is in reality on a sliding scale. Which way do you want to slide? That's what it boils down to. Personally, I don't think that we should slide either way. I think we should move forward and be propelled forward by the great motor of life, which is joy. Saint Germain has referred to joy as the motor of life. I think that joy in being an artisan in the temple is probably the most important function that a human being can actually engage in. We have many functions from the cradle to the grave, but our destiny lies not there. We eat, we sleep, we procreate, we marry, we are given in marriage, we enjoy nature, we work. We may amass money, or we may have no money. We may develop a little, or we may not develop at all. It's all a matter of what takes place in our individual worlds. For here man is very much the individual, and the artisan in the temple is first of all an individual. It is true, of course, that we're all a part of God. We can apply this to the whole world. We can say that Adolf Hitler was a part of God, as well as we can say that Mother Cabrini was a part of God. We can apply this term, this epithet, to the most sublime individual or the most ridiculous individual, the Austrian paper hanger, who ruled an empire. It doesn't matter, some people say. I say that it does matter, and the masters say that it does matter, and our presence tells us that it matters. It matters very much what we do and what we think. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, is not only a truism, it is a statement and restatement of the old law. Therefore, the artisan in the temple must be aware of his thoughts about himself, because our thoughts about ourselves are indeed effective. They're effective and they're affective. They affect us for good or ill, and they affect others for good or ill, our thoughts. And so I want to discuss with you, in connection with this sermon this morning on the artisan in the temple, the question of spiritual facility. In other words, the opening up of spiritual vision, the powers of spiritual perception. This seems to be a goal in the lives of many people. The desire to be able to do the same thing that Jesus did, that the great masters do. And they will apply it to seership as well, and say, I would like to possess the power to be able to see into the invisible, to be able to hear at a distance, to be able to project the consciousness out of the body. Recently, I visited with a man who was assisting Tom Miller in making our movie. And on his desk, I found, where the nameplate usually goes, a plate that said, Chairman of the Board, B-O-R-E-D. And I realized full well, even in that whimsical statement, that many people today are bored because they are not artisans in the temple consciously. If we are integrated into a master plan, or integrated into the master plan in our consciousness, we have an entirely different sense of doing. Everything we do takes on a different phase of meaning. The little boring task becomes a movement in the mainstream that is leading us to a final goal, which final goal we recognize is only final in a cyclic sense, because once it is achieved, a greater goal is beyond it, and the ultimate purpose is thereby served. But now we return to the thought, the very key thought about the artist in the temple, the thought of opening the centers, the thought of having spiritual perception. They say that knowledge is power, and whereas physical knowledge and material knowledge has always been considered to be power, thus we have secular education, spiritual knowledge, or seership, the ability to be able to see at a distance, to possess psychic faculties, seems to be a premium in the consciousness of people today who feel that once they have this power, they have achieved the ultimate. I would point out today, in the name of El Morya and at his request, the grave dangers attendant upon the opening of the centers prematurely, and the great good fortune that comes to people who do not open the centers prematurely. Long ago in a lecture I gave, I referenced the concept of, thank God you cannot hear the footsteps of a fly. And this is very important. Because if we had a magnification per se in our hearing, making it so keen and acute that we could hear the moth consuming our garments in the closet, and everything were to manifest in a similar scale, we would often find that life is deafening to us, even physically. And we would not live in a world of peace or quiet even in our sleep. We would be constantly disturbed by this super hearing. So you see, dramatically we can reveal to you the blessedness of tempering the wind to the shorn lamb. Now then, let us deal with the problem of the opening of the centers prematurely from the Master's vision, and from what is right and what is real and what should be, rather than what is. What should be is the ennoblement of the character. This means taking on the vestments of the Master. The vestments of the Master. Investing one's consciousness in the Master's sense about everything, leaving alone the human sense. When we take on the Master's character and ideals, we become a different person. We are changed. This alteration, then, is a prerequisite to the opening of the centers. But those who put the cart before the horse, and many are doing it, will often find themselves a helpless victim of a macrocosmic world where they are a microcosmic entity. A moving picture was shown on television recently a rerun of an old movie called The Shrinking Man. It dramatically illustrated this whole concept. The man began to shrink until eventually he had to live in a dollhouse. Then from the dollhouse he went down to the point where he could crawl into a mouse hole, and he had to run from the house cat. In the end of the movie, after having had a battle with a spider, wherein he used the pin as a harpoon and finally impaled the spider on this pin, he escaped into the grass, which was a forest of giant trees, through an opening in the screen which was larger than a window. And he continued to shrink. And as he looked out there in the grass and the whole universe and at the stars, he said, in reality, all is a matter of relativity. So he felt he was going into an infinity within, as well as if he had become one who continually enlarged, the enlarging man. Because after all, he found that he had all of the faculties of consciousness when he shrunk, you see. Now, what I'm trying to do this morning is to illustrate for you, for all time I hope, the principle that the horse must be before the cart, the horse of development, of character ideals, of spiritual rapport with God and the Masters, that enables us to think in their terms and in their frame of reference before we open those ghastly centers, which can become the means, yes, of our reaching into the macrocosm and finding God, but prematurely when opened can cause us no end of grief, because we find ourselves helpless, naked, before this whirlwind of psychic forces which will be able to move us as easily as a straw is cast into the wind. So above all things then, understand that the artisan must first of all develop the consciousness of the temple of God. He must recognize that his body is the temple of God, but he must carry it a step further and say that his mind is the temple of God. People don't understand St. Paul. They don't understand the scriptures that refer to the fact that the body of man is the temple of God, and they don't understand that the body is always fourfold. When the term is used in the scriptures, the body is the temple of God, it means the body, the consciousness, the mind, the feeling world, the allness of man, of individuality, is the temple of God. But we seem to think in terms of the body, and we wash the outside of the platter scrupulously clean. We clean our ears, we clean our noses, we clean our face, we clean all over physically. But we are dirty in our minds, and dirty in our consciousness, and dirty in our feeling world without ever realizing it, because we attach scrupularity, the state of being scrupulous. We attach this to the physical self and often overlook the real human being, the total consciousness of our being. And this is why I say that it is very clear to me now that the artisan must always first develop his spirituality, his spiritual nature. He must develop his feelings of love and obedience to the Christ, his feelings of respect for human beings that are here on earth besides him. Right beside us, people are living, and they have rights. We see it on the nation's highways. We saw it again, dramatically illustrated, that almost every single time that we went forward to pass, even if we were only 10 feet behind another car, the other car, if it was a Volkswagen or a huge van, would pull out directly in front of us, having no regard whatsoever for their own life or limb or for ours. And the speed didn't seem to matter. We could be coming at them at 80 miles an hour or coming at them at 20 miles an hour. They would still dart out, you see. Showing that the problem that the world has today is a problem of recognizing one's brother and evidencing concern for his life, not just our own. We find that in the social aspects of organizations such as the Communist Party and the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara, that these social aspects are stressed and they are considered as human problems solvable in the chemistry of humanity. But the centuries have not shown or demonstrated, in fact, that man by intellectualism is able to effect emotional control. To the contrary, those who are at all versed in skillful diplomacy soon come to realize that there is no question about it. You have to win the feelings of people before you can even direct or guide their minds. So we again learn about others and we learn about ourselves in those interpersonal relationships that we engage in through what we term friendship and through this business of living. So the artisan in the temple must be exceedingly aware of himself. And the artisan in the temple must be aware of the need to first develop the Christ aspect of the person, and then to understand that once the Christ aspect is developed, that it itself possesses the natural trigger quality of triggering the stream of natural unfoldment, whereby the spiritual, the psychic senses, the seeing at a distance, the penetrating vision will unfold with it. And I can cite, although I do it humbly in God's eyes, to a very limited degree, my own experience, that I never did stress developing along the path of reading people's auras, looking into their past, finding out who I was in some past life. I never stressed being able to project my consciousness at a distance, to control the forces of nature, to bring the elements under obedience. No. Instead of that, I stressed proximity to the deity, both as the deity and as the ideals of the deity. We must recognize then, dear hearts, and I hope you're not too tired to listen to me, because this is a very important concept. We must recognize that the deity as a person is one aspect, but the deity as his own law is another vital aspect. And you cannot, I repeat, you cannot validly separate the laws of the deity from the deity. To make a friend out of God and to flaunt his laws will always bring about an attendant manifestation of human jangle and discord in your world that will bring you down and will not raise you up, which should be your aim. So I want to stress that friendship with God means friendship with his laws also, of reasonability, of decency toward our fellow men and to organizational purposes. But now we come for a moment, we stop our process on the artisanship in the temple, on the artisan in the temple, and we begin to examine the aspect of the artisan in the temple from the standpoint of the guild. We are going to look at group activity for a moment in the temple. We talk about individuality and individuality of expression, but we ask ourselves in the business of the workaday world, in the business of living, what can we do as a group that we cannot do as an individual? And we find that we have multiplied the power of the individual enormously in the world scene when we harness the individual's talents and abilities in group action. And so here we have the developing of what we will term a spiritual guild. And the forming of the spiritual guild is, in essence, the activity of the Great White Brotherhood. You might apply it to the Summit Lighthouse as an organization and say that we are members of the guild, that this is our guild hall, that we are artisans in the guild, or workmen in the Lord's temple, that we are a part of the building of the temple in this age. This epoch is ours. that our energies are ours. Now, what we do with those energies, what we do with our lives, how much we contribute of meaningful activity to the aspect of the guild, and hence to the manifestation of the total culture, which I will bring out is the Great White Brotherhood. In other words, the Great White Brotherhood represents the culture, the guild represents the summit, and the artisan represents the individual summiteer, a member. Unless we have some developed sense of this, and a realization that we cannot put now the cart before the horse, and develop some super-seership which seeks to evade responsibility by making us possessed with a capacity which we do not really have, thus fooling ourselves. We have to cast this aside. Instead of that, we must face up to reality. I suspect that this last statement may not have been fully grasped by all of you, so I would like to point out that there is a tendency toward spiritual sloth on the part of practically everyone. Thus, we must equate the scriptures that Jesus brought out with the subject matter at hand, and remember that his words must, in this case, be taken literally, as in many cases they should, where he says, "The Father worketh hitherto, and I work." I think that if you can take people out on the lawn and then have them weave garlands of flowers and dance around and play little games, that they would expand enormous quantities of energy most happily and give that energy happily. But when that has to be employed in the aspect of work, then we find sometimes that the artisan balks at the fact that he must work. And therefore, we come around to the subject of the Father working hitherto and I work. In my discussions with the Masters, I have learned that their service after the ascension is enormous. That after they pass through the change into the higher octaves, that they just begin to work. And at that level, they have a distinct realization that would not come to us ordinarily of the terrific problems encountered in the building structures that human beings have created in consciousness in the electronic belt and in the four lower bodies. In other words, we have a tremendous structuring of distortion which has occurred in most people. The artisans at the summit here are no exception. Just because we join the guild does not immediately transform us electrically, electronically, so that we can fit the highest schema of the Masters. On the contrary, all it does is open the door or afford us an opportunity for the expansion of our identity. We are cells in the body of God, but unless we are working cells with the capacity for expression of the deific idea that is actually the concept of God for the guild, the concept of God for the culture, then you see we are working against nature, not flowing in the mainstream thereof. Now, this particular talk that I'm giving to you was prepared by Master El Morya and placed in my consciousness in order to acquaint you with the fact that there is a meaningful structure existing here, but that the power to enhance the structure lies within the hands of the artisan. It cannot lie entirely in the hands of the group or the guild, because the guild is no greater in its expression than the sum total of the greatness of the individuals put together. At this point, we introduce that which is not new to us, but still has to fall in the category of the eternally new. The idea of an ever new presence of order. I find that the greatest problem in the universe is really chaos. because chaos is any form of disorder. It doesn't matter how minute it may express. You wear glasses, you have misplaced them. You reach for the glasses. You cannot see without them. You cannot read a word of print. You immediately are faced with a dilemma of where are my glasses? You use money in order to pay for goods or services. You are in a restaurant or a doctor's office, and it says cash on the spot, Johnny. And you reach in your pocket, and your wallet is missing. Someone stole it, or you left it home. You immediately face a dilemma. What are you going to do about it? The man wants his money. So we live in a very, very practical world, where chaos introduced into that world shows the need for order. And therefore the Master has stressed to me that the time has come for what he calls the Guildhall consciousness, to enter into the artisan sense, as well as the artisan to now begin the development of his sense as a workman in the house of God. I suspect that sloth is probably the devil's greatest tool, one of the greatest, that and discouragement. And I think nothing discourages us more than sloth. I am not applying, nor is the Master implying, that we have sloth here. He is merely pointing out that there is a tendency toward sloth as there is a tendency toward gravity. And gravity and sloth are almost hand in hand. A state of consciousness that wants to work in the Master's temple as an artisan, to be a part of the guild, to assist and contribute to its greatness, to the Guildhall greatness, must recognize that his natural tendency from the human level, not the divine level, is to have the gravity of sloth tending toward chaos in his world. It takes an effort to think and have a place to keep your glasses, to have a place to keep your wallet, to have a place for everything with everything in place. It takes an enormous amount of thought and planning to actually furnish a house or to buy groceries for a given period of time. Tasks that seem very simple are actually colossal when they're multiplied numerically. And therefore the problems, the logistics of the whole world complex are today staggering to the imagination. Is it any wonder then that the benefits of computers was given to our society? And actually, if you will only think of it that way, when you order your life, you are utilizing a giant computer. You are using the whole facility of being, of self, to produce a wanted situation of order in your life. Now, I regret very much that I have to take your time for this discussion if I bore any of you. But I assure you that the Master has said that this is a very important message. Just because it may have the earmarks of the obvious about it does not mean that it is not important. The Master says the word artisan, the word guild, the word culture, judged from the spiritual aspect, are very vital because they are keys to a functional manifestation of hierarchy upon the planet. Hierarchy is not going to manifest just through the intellect. Hierarchy will manifest through the fourfold nature of man. When we do not need this body anymore, we can shed it. As long as we need it, we should have it in good health and have it in joy. I think then that if we will recognize the forming of good habits and feeding them into our computer is going to make automatic a great deal of our normal functions. And as it makes these functions automatic, it will take more and more of the strain off of the developing embryo from a spiritual standpoint. We are embryonic gods as long as we are involved in the temple magic of just working on the physical body to see that it produces a feeling of elan, of well-being. As long as what we're doing is just that, we are neglecting the developing of our immortal soul. So therefore, shall we then dispense with the physical body? How ridiculous can we be? Of course not. The physical body is an important function, or we would not have it. But don't make it any more important than 25% of the business of living. Take the mind and make it a separate thing, if you will. But always realize the four functions of the four lower bodies must be integrated into the square. And eventually the square, when the physical form is no longer needed, becomes a triad, a triadic manifestation. But it is always three that agree in one. For in reality, what is most important to us is our state of consciousness. Consciousness is capable of absolutely manifesting a state of bliss. And bliss is the natural divine state when that divine state is free from the sense of bliss and enters into bliss in a natural manner. So long as a person is seeking bliss for the sake of enjoyment without the actual honoring of the Creator, by understanding that they are expected to manifest His nature, they are falling short of the mark. Some people say, I just love to give decrees. Others say, I don't give a fig for decrees, but I do it. The point is, we should neither be doing things because we enjoy them or because we do them from a sense of duty, but we should do whatever we do as artisans to God, as a part of the whole noble process. You take, for example, Leonardo da Vinci and his sculpture. We understand that he first drew in charcoal the anatomy of the perfection he sought to express. The charcoal image was lacking in the glamour of the finished product. The things that we have to do in order to prepare the groundwork for our finished product, our divine self to manifest, may sometimes seem laborious, even lugubrious, heavy. But when we forget the self, when we enter into the state of the order and natural perfection of the universe, and see that as we manifest that order and perfection through our consciousness, the social consciousness, the religious consciousness, the sense of self, all put together, we are making great possibilities of change in our realm of purpose, the realm of the individual's purposes. And we are allying or aligning these changes with the perfection of God. Now, if we do not do this, the whole process may be incomprehensible to us. For it is in the doing that we are actually seeing, and this is what was meant by the statement, for we shall see him as he is, for we shall be like him. It is a matter of the artisan becoming the image of the master artisan. And oh, what tremendous joy the artisan can develop as he becomes imbued with the natural joy of the master artisan. The guild then becomes the brotherhood of man. The culture becomes the cosmos. It is a constant expansion. And it reminds me of that little grains of sand, many drops of water make a mighty ocean or a mighty land. We are often caught in the jaws of the trap that says, you're not making any progress. What's happening to you? You're just doing this and you're doing that and you're not getting anywhere. This is a case of our failures to see. And I think that we sometimes feel that if we ourselves only had enough spiritual vision We could penetrate the opacities that surround us. We could somehow or other trace the realities of self and bring them into view. And this is the greatest fallacy there is, because we first must bring forth the character from the unseen. Blessed are those that believe and have not seen. Blessed are those that believe and have seen. But more blessed are those that believe and have not seen. You see, we must have the faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen as yet. We must function from the level of faith by realizing that God is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him, by realizing that His laws are just, that whatever good things we do we will receive, as evil will be received or returned to us for recompense. We must recognize then that the greater order we can produce in our individual life, whether it be the rearrangement of the cards in our wallet or the rearrangement of our pocketbook for greater ease in serving our needs, or a kitchen cupboard, or a desk drawer, or a work position, or a garden for better harvesting and planting. Whatever we do to produce order in our world is a part of the macrocosmic scheme, even though it is involved in the most intricate microcosmic miasma. Order your life then, and you bring about heaven's first law as the artisan of God in the temple of being. Order your life then, and you take the first step to produce the building of a pyramid. Order your life then, and you join issue with the problems that confront us as a nation, as a world, as a people. Because order is the key to it all. And this is not something that we do once and then it is always done forever. We are ordering and we are reordering. And our reordering is often more important than our original ordering. Because hopefully we have established in the field of mind, in the field of the feeling world, a greater sense of what we are doing. And this is why I say to you today, as we stand upon the threshold of a great springboard that is going to catapult us into prominence in the world, that unless we are ready for that, unless we are ready for St. Germain's plan, unless we are ready with our visual aids, unless we have the facilities to train the people and the program developed here in our pilot activities, we are going to be caught in the middle of the stream, and we're not going to have anything that we can travel on. We're going to drown then, or be inundated in the new age, and we ourselves will not be ready for it. Now the young people all over America today are clamoring in the excitement of life for reality. And all that the world is giving them is a constant, repetitious, boring cycle of sex and more sex, from a face that is a little more vivacious or a little more interesting than the other face. And youth is constantly supplying these new goddesses of the screen, the sirens that lure men to their doom. And what they can't do with sex, they're doing now with glamour, and they're doing it also with greed. They're showing them, now if you had this money, you could have a bigger car. You could travel all over the world. You could have more women than you have now, and higher up women. You know, women that are better. You've been playing around with trash now, fellow. Now, if you just had a little more money, you could get into the big circuit. Now, if we're going to move in that mainstream, where are we? We're nowhere. And the church today is totally confused about the nature of being. What we need then is the artisan in the temple who will understand the direction in which he is moving. He will understand the direction of the flow of the mainstream of spiritual life. He will understand how to guide his four lower bodies. Krishnamurti, when he was under the direction of Lord Maitreya, he said, "Your body is the horse upon which you ride." And many of the theosophical tenets were imbued with more knowledge of the Christ than anything that has ever come down to us since, until The Masters in this time, through the summit and other avenues, finally opened up the consciousness of man to the I Am presence in Holy Christ's self. And that, of course, has opened up new vistas. Now today, we are bringing forth, in preparation for supplying the needs of millions of young men and women, for the hands that will be disillusioned by drugs, disillusioned by sex, disillusioned by money, disillusioned with their world, they will reach up and say, where can I touch the reality of the face of the Christ? And we must be ready. We must be ready by the visual aids in films, in music, in decrees, in prose, in instruction books, in classroom techniques, in scientific instruments, in a university, and in universities, in instructors, in ministers, in musicians, and in workmen of all sorts that will form by their craft the total Guildhall production of victory for this planet. This is the movement of the New Age. This is the plan of the Master. This stood behind the purpose of Santa Barbara. And when I recently stood in Santa Barbara and I saw the arch that was not the Arch of Triumph, because against it leaned a broken, over and bent old gas pump from probably 1925, as I gazed at that arch cracked by earthquakes, and I realized that we had to mend the arch, I saw not only the mending of that arch by the work of our hands and the devotion of our hearts, but I saw the preparing of the necessary classrooms for the first teachers to be turned out by the summit. Because there at Santa Barbara is going to be the esoteric school of the Fraternity of the Keepers of the Flame. Here will arise, if the plan be followed, and I always put an if in, because you people are the if, and so am I. We are the ifs. On our backs ride the power of the future. What we do will be determined. It's not going to be determined by Stringfellow Barr of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, or by Robert Maynard Hutchins, or by those people who feel that they are intellectually the elite of the planet and thus the architects of the New Age, but it is, and I say ought to be, determined by the Ascended Masters, by those who understand how to hold in their hands a culture and pass that culture to us. That is what is needed. And therefore we are preparing to counteract the vicious socialistic forces that seek the regimentation of man and the binding of man to the wheel of the ancient law of the ox cart. Just treading the treadmill of existence in a social dream fostered by the illusions of some intellectual. In its place, the greatest mind of the ages that will span the beginnings and the endings of vast cycles beyond comprehension, the mind of God, comes to us the vital intelling of the realities of not only the microcosmic man, but of the macrocosmic world. The whole of it all, in all of its interesting panorama of variety, is all manifest on the screen of consciousness. And it is not a harbinger of doom, but a manifestation of vitalized hope, because it sings to us a song, the song that could almost be called a lullaby of the Mother of the World, that the Mother of the World seeks to rock in her arms. The infant humanity that today are gazing upon human illusion and divine reality and cannot tell the difference. Our role is to expound upon the realities of God and expunge from society the darkness, the confusion, and the pain that have brought so much blight into manifestation temporally We will replace it in the name of Almighty God by His grace and His reality. Do you have a part in it? If you do, then nothing else is as important. Thank you.